I'm Hunter Atkins, CEO of the Bank of Nashville. The Bank of Nashville sponsors a CEO empowerment series known as the CEOCafe. Today's guest is DennisBrown, former leader of a $500 million company in Atlanta, and purely represents an empowerment executive. He empowers his people, as I think you will see in his message today. So join the Bank of Nashville as we present you DennisBrown, author and lecturer.
I'd like to introduce DennisBrown. When we first started thinking about this, Jim was going to arrange the speakers, and the first thing we asked was that we could hear the speakers before we start. And Dennis was nice enough to come up from Atlanta, talk to a handful of us, and we just said, we're in. He very impactful. His background is fixing companies, and instead of taking the slash and burn approach that others have taken, he has a total methodology that really incorporates being clear on what the company's got to do to be successful, then communicating that throughout the ranks, and then making sure the measurements are in place so that they wind up doing what they need to do to be successful. I would call his method high touch, hard nose. So I'd like to turn it over to DennisBrown, and thank you very much, Dennis.
Thank you. The things we're going to talk about today, most of you have done before, or are doing now, or heard, certainly they're not new. And we're going to visit about some of those. And I think there's an ability for these to carry across lots of businesses. I don't think there'll be much new that you'll hear about today. I think a lot of this will be common things for you. And the first 10 years of my career, I was in the HR business, and in that I learned that most people want to be a part of a successful company. And that's not everyone, but most people want to be a part of that. And our challenge after, I noticed that throughout companies, and I didn't think they were utilizing people throughout the business like they should. It seemed as though, we had a few top people at the top that were almost driving the masses, and, they would kind of fall by the wayside and then get some more masses in and just drive some more. And it seemed like from the HR standpoint, we were losing out on a great resource. And so what I wanted to do as I started being moved into some general managership roles was to try to tap into the resources that we have throughout the entire company, not just the people that are, quote, the smart guys, but they're smart guys throughout the company. And I realized early on in this process that there are smart guys throughout the company. My first general manager's role was in a railcar business down in Murfreesboro. And I was 30 years old, and really didn't think I could do it, and I was really nervous about that job, more than I was running a $500 million company. And we had 106 employees, I think. And but I used to go back during the weeks, during one night a week from 10 till 2 in the morning, just to let the night shift guys that are out there and it's hot and it's uncomfortable, let them know that I knew that they were there, and just give a chance to talk in those off hours and whatever. And one night I was out, and out of one of these big giant rail cars came rolling a guy named Ricky Jennings. And the reason I remember his name is he was such a pain. He was just one of those nuisance guys that nothing was right, ever. And he came running out, and his first words were always, "I want you to tell me why." And then you were just bracing yourself for, somebody not listening to your answer. Next time you'd see him, he'd be like that. So he came rolling out of one of these cars, and he said, "I've figured out the solution to all these cracks that we're having internally in these rail cars." They get out, and after about 6 months of hauling flour and cement and fertilizer around the country, they started developing some cracks in one place. And so he said, this is the answer. We put a gusset here and an angle here and something else, and I didn't understand that. And so I said, well, the smart guys, the engineers, will be in here tomorrow morning at 8. There'll be about 15 of those here. So if you would come in tomorrow when you get off your shift and tell them what you found, I think that would be a big help. So Ricky came rolling in, and here these guys were sitting all their white shirts, and I said, "Hey, I've got somebody I want to have you visit with," and he has some thoughts. I didn't say he had the answer, because they would have said they wouldn't have listened, but he has some thoughts about this particular problem that we've been struggling with for many years. And so he presented and brought the pieces in and showed it, and you could see these blank looks of question marks all over the face. Why didn't we think of that? And I don't know how many times that I've seen some of the greatest pearls of wisdom come from the 4th grade education person. And that's one of the techniques that we've tried to use in training. And I'm going to run through several slides and kind of get to the punchline at the end, because I think the thing that we did that we'll talk about at the end that has something to do with these key objectives is really has separated companies that I've been a part of from other companies. And it's not my doing, it's the doing of the companies I've been a part of. But I'm really a strong believer in tapping in, and everybody says that, but I'm really a strong believer though in tapping into the depths of the company. And I don't know all the companies that are represented here, but I would dare say there's a lot of really smart people that have a lot of really good answers for what your company could do that have never been asked. And many times they'll never volunteer that, but if they're asked, they'll have a lot of quick answers. And so we'll run through a few slides and then get to something that's a little more significant. First thing is have the right people in the right place. The first job that I had in the brick industry, and I ran a company called Boral Bricks, and we were the largest brick and roof tile company in America. We had about 40 plants from the Carolinas to California, and we had about 3,500 employees, I think. We had 1,700 in our brick business after we did some consolidating. But I was there 2 months, and we started looking for acquisitions. We were number 5 in the industry when I got there. And we made 2 acquisitions within 6 months, I think it was. And all of a sudden we had 3 companies there. The first company was fairly undisciplined because it had 6 regions within that first company, 6 regional managers, 6 finance managers, 6 manufacturing managers, 6 everything in one company. And they all did their own set of books and didn't talk to each other very much. And then we bought these other 2 companies that had their own set of issues there. And so we were just cleaning up this one, and all of a sudden we had 3 of everything, 3 sales managers, 3 finance people, 3 manufacturing people, 3 accounting people, 3 HR people, 3 everything. And so it was really critical that we got the right people in the right place. And so I really had a fairly clear view of the standards that I really wanted us to have. And I didn't want us to have clones in the business. I didn't want people looking and acting like me, because you've got some weird people that way. And I didn't want people that would be afraid to disagree, as much as we may resist that from time to time. We need disagreement, you know, and our first reaction is one of these sometimes, but if we'll just settle down, we usually get some good information. Had to be smart people, had to be people that could attract people, had a little bit of natural instinctive leadership in them, and most of all, they had to be team players and had to be working with the team. And I'll tell one quick story about a team player situation. We had pulled all these people together in this new company, and it was just 2 months old, and we were making radical changes. We had the other 2 companies we bought were family-owned companies, over 100 years old. I'm embarrassed to say this, they were still using the N-word in their conversation when we first bought them. It was just a chaotic. And then we had our company that did the purchasing of the business, and we bought them. And so we're kind of Mr. Corporate. We had a few MBAs, and over here are the rednecks. But these people happen to make brick a lot better and cheaper, and the customers like them a lot more than they did this company. So, you know, you're trying to say, how do we marry all these people together when the cultures are so unacceptable in some respects, but yet their skills are so tremendous in other respects? And so that proved a great challenge, you know. And I remember going into a couple sessions where we had 30 sales guys having dinner, and I was the last one there, and hearing a joke or 2 being told that shouldn't have been told. And I walked in, I remember it didn't take any nerve to say this in front of these 30 people, and that was our whole sales force, that the next person that says a joke that involves that subject, we won't even discuss it. You'll never work here again. You're fired that minute, you know. Never, ever will you work here again. And that gets their attention when you look them in the eye and you say, I absolutely mean this. Because we had teamwork I was talking about. And so we were making major changes in our business. And one of our high-level VPs that was respected throughout the industry that came from one of the other companies, and he was smart, had an MBA. He was one of the cultured redneck boys, and he was really good. And I liked him personally, and everybody liked him in our company and all our competitors and customers. But we were making all these big changes in this conference room, 10 or 12 of us, in the direction of the company. And yet I'd heard kind of second or third hand, and he was out kind of subverting those directions we were making, and he was you know, kind of ridiculing those and downplaying those. And so I heard that on a Friday morning, and I saw him Friday afternoon, and I said, we've got to meet this afternoon. And he said, I'm tied up until late. And I said, okay, tomorrow morning from 10 until 2, we've got to meet. And I didn't have a clue, as I was saying this, what I was going to do if it didn't work out. But I said, we've got to meet from 10 until 2 tomorrow morning to decide if you have a job here, because I understand that you are in full agreement in our meetings, and you're all on the team there. but you get out and you're letting your former friends from these other companies influence you in a negative way, and you're not supporting what we're doing. And we can't have that. So tomorrow between 10 and 12, we're going to decide if you have a job here or not. And it was a very emotional meeting that next day, and I won a strong convert because I've seen him stand in front of 300 people and recite that story himself. He was a Southern boy, and he played up that South Carolina accent real a lot. And he said I was almost fired because I was out of step with the team. And he used to give my speech for me many times by saying, you know, once we as an entire group of people agree on a direction, then let's follow that direction. And that ties in a little bit to our key objectives here, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And most of the things we're going to talk about will eventually work their way that way. But he's given that message that says once we agree on a direction, then we've got to follow in unison. And if anybody has a better idea, then all they've got to do is raise their hand. And if it's a better idea, we'll erase one of those things and put that better idea on there. But until then, we've got to follow in unison there. So you've got to get the right people in the right place. We can't, much the same thing, we can't have mediocre leaders. You know, the CEOs in this room, you can only stretch yourself so far. And beyond that, you've got to have people doing this for you. You've got to have people that have those characteristics I was talking about earlier and more. And you've got to have people that can literally stand up and sell the message of the company, not push it, but sell it. And having people where they're energized and excited about carrying it forward. And you can have some really good people that are not worthy of this position. When we put those three companies together, we had some really, really good people that had VP titles in the other company, but they didn't have that charisma, that fire in their belly. They didn't want to be number one at all costs, and they just didn't have that passion for that, you know. And so we tried to find them other jobs, and some of those people turned out to be rousing successes in these other jobs. It wasn't that we didn't have a few tears along the way too, because that's difficult to do. But you got to have good, strong leaders. And there's a lot of times you've got to just trust your instincts. I don't know how many times I have, and I promise you, if you all have dealt with people or issues very much, that you've instinctively known that there was something wrong here. There's something wrong with this, the way this person is working with customers. There's something wrong with this person's demeanor in terms of how they communicate internally. There's something wrong with this program that we have. You just know instinctively there is. And my challenge here is to jump into those instinctive things that you know about, and don't put those off. Jump into them right away. There's such a strong urge on our part to put it off till Monday if it's Friday. And I'm saying that what I've learned to do is to, if it's Friday at noon and I have a concern about something, then I address that Friday afternoon before I go home. And I think that's maybe some mental illness that causes that. Because I have read that only 10% of the managers in the world today relish taking on the hard decisions. I mean, they can't sleep, they can't go home unless they've at least gotten into it and put their foot in the water and made people aware that this is something that's important we're going to be working on. But I think the same thing applies to things that people have done well, just as well. When someone has done some exemplary kinds of actions or activities and really done some really superlative kind of things, and you don't wait till Monday or till a performance review to do that. You go to them immediately and you tell them thank you for what they've done, and you respond to those just as quickly as you might the other. Reward individuals and the groups for excellence. There are tons of ways to do this, and we've all seen companies do this well and not so well. And when you've been on the short end of it not being done well, and then you get a chance to lead, then you hope you've made mental notes on don't make that mistake again. And we had one of our employees, and I've forgotten, his name was Harvey McGee. And first of all, I'll say that when people have done exemplary kinds of things and you want to reward them, many times looking them in the eye and saying thank you with a sincere handshake or a hand on the shoulder and a sincere thank you will go a long way. They haven't had that probably many times. And then, unbelievably, a handwritten note may be one of the most valuable tools in the world. People like handwritten notes, not an email, but something that you've taken the time. And my handwriting is so poor. And I've done that, and I've had people say, I think this is the greatest note in the world, but would you read it to me? Because I can't read it, you know. You said something about great, and my name was on there, so, but can you tell me? That's really true. But I remember there was a man named Harvey McGee, and I'd been over to their plant in Bessemer, Alabama. And Harvey was walking in the door of the plant, and he ran an extruding machine. They ran all this raw material in, and it pressed it out this brick-like form that was 20 feet long, and then they cut it up and whatever. And so Harvey McGee was walking in, a very rotund person, and just a nice man. I visited with him before, and he was walking through the door, and I said, "Hey, Harvey, what are you doing?" He was whistling. He said, "Well, I'm making a joyful noise to the Lord." And I said, "Well, I'm a whistler too." And we started walking back to his work area, and we started talking about his job, and he told me how much he loved it and our new specification standards he was trying to follow to the T. And he showed me these quality issues that he was trying to make sure this green brick that would shrink, that he was keeping it just to the exact tolerance. You could see a real heartfelt desire. Then he talked a little bit about being a deacon in his Baptist church and how much that meant to him. And he talked about his family and his wife and his girls and his daughters and how much that meant to him. And so I simply got back, and after these visits, there's all kinds of reasons to write people little notes. So I wrote him a note, and I said, "Dear Harvey," I said, "what a pleasure to visit with you." And I remember saying, "You may be one of the smartest men I know." And he was talking about his 4th grade education. But I said, "You may be one of the smartest people I know because you know why you're here. You know, you're here to bring joy to your family, to work hard, to make a joyful noise to the Lord, and to just be a good friend." And I said, "There aren't many people that have their life nailed down that quickly and that readily." And so I went back to our office about 6 months ago, and one of the ladies came in and she said, "Dennis, you'll like this envelope we just got." And this was just a little handwritten note to Harvey that I'd written. And the note said, well, my dad, Harvey, had passed away, and you probably don't remember him, but the day he passed away, we were going through his top chest of drawers, and we found this note that had been read many times, and it was really brown around the envelope where he'd put his dirty hands on it and read it many times. And so we read it, and we want you to know that we used this note for the outline of his ceremony at his burial. And they had people from work come up and talk about what a good job he'd done, and his family members came up and did the same thing. And you know, those notes will go a long way. And I tell you, I can tell you right now, I've got notes that people wrote me 30 years ago, you know, and probably a lot of you do too. And so don't forget those little notes of encouragement. But there's a lot of other ways to do that too, and financially it never hurts. You know, you can pat them on the back and write them a note, but it never hurts to give them some money. And we had 1,300 people that did not have any kind of incentive program. So I'd reserved at the end of one of our fiscal years $600 after taxes for all of these people. And the year was over, the money was reserved, and it was $1.3 million or something. So I reported to a company in Australia, and I ran the U.S. business. And so I was talking to my boss about this, and I told him that I'd made this reserve for this, and he thought it was ridiculous. And here he's making $3 to $5 million a year, and he said $600 will mean nothing to those people. And I said $600 will mean everything to these people. And I was in the office of a hotel manager. They didn't have a conference room, and my family was with me, and I didn't want to interrupt them while they were sleeping, and it was an Australian call, so I asked the man if I could use his phone. And I said, "Take 15 minutes probably." Well, 2.5 hours later, I came out of his office, and he said, "I'm curious, who were you talking to?" And I said, "Well, that was my boss." He said, "I've never heard anybody talk to a boss that way." But I was so sure that those people needed that $600 that I was willing that day to lose my job over it. And he told me 3 times, "Listen to me carefully. If I were you, I wouldn't do that." And so I went and told my wife that day. I said, "I think I've just gotten fired," because I called somebody and told them to give those checks out today, and we did. And luckily, I didn't get fired. But those people appreciated that money just unbelievably. And we've had several situations just like that where we had a guy that worked on weekends, and he worked a lot of weekends. He had a wife and 2 little kids, but he was our smart guy. If we were going to buy a business, we went to Paul, and we said, "Help us start the preliminary looks at this acquisition." If we were going to consider closing a plant or getting out of some products, we always went to Paul. And before you know it, Paul had a stack of projects like this. He worked about 6 straight weekends with that wife and those 2 children at home. So we made a check out for $5,000 to his wife, and we sent it to her in the mail with her name on it. Told her, "Thank you for letting us have that guy." And she called me back when she got the check and said, "You can have that man anytime you want him." and so she missed him and whatever, but you know, so you can pat him on the back, or you can shake their hand, or you can write them a note. And sometimes they can't read the note, but they just know intuitively it's good. Or you can give them some money, and all those things work. But I think we need to take care of people. And I think the next one is tie goes to the employee. Baseball, you know, the tie goes to the runner. And I don't know how in the world, sidetrack, how those umpires call that. I get so confused which got there first. But I've seen so many company situations where we just get so stingy with people, you know. We cut the corner and we round down all the time instead of rounding up. And the only thing I'll tell about that is whenever you get a chance to get into six figures for the first time, that's kind of a big deal. I'm making $100,000. And you say, my first goal was to earn my age back when I was in my 20s. It really was. I wanted to earn my age. And then I wanted to make $100,000. And so I was making $92,000 or something. And our company had done really well. I was running an electrical products business, and we made every electrical product you could put in an 80-story office building. And I didn't know the difference in AC and DC, by the way. And we were just really doing really, really well. And so I knew I was going to get a big raise up to $100,000. My boss, Don, came in, and that guy liked me. He called me Mr. Fix-It, and we got along really well. I had a few fights, but we could fight and love each other at the same time. And so he came in, I just knew this is the day I'm going to be $100,000. I told my wife that morning, I'm going to come home a $100,000 guy. And so I came home, she said, I didn't look like a $100,000 look on your face. And I said, this is a $99,600 look on your face, on my face. And, the point there is for 400 measly bucks, I mean, and I've learned that lesson through that if in doubt, give the person the money. If in doubt, let them take off. If in doubt, do this. And if they're good people, you'll get repaid so many times over for doing that, It's like a law of gravity. It just happens. And I just know that's the truth. And so ties go to the employee always, and you round up, and the good employees will not take advantage of that. And the ones that do take advantage of that, they'll be shamed by the good employees. And so that always works. Continuous training, I talked about training, for the people that are the PhDs down to the fourth grade people. And sometimes they're isolated kinds of training based on their particular skills. But I really, really have always tried to encourage our training staff, and we always had a training staff of professional training people. Tried to encourage them to blend these groups as much as possible, because, again, every time almost the smart guy came out wondering how this guy turned out to be the real smart guy. It almost always happened, and you'd go sit in the back of the room, and the dialogue that would take place, one person couldn't put proper sentences together, but the other person didn't quite understand what he was talking about because he had a great idea and he hadn't thought of it first. And so I really tried to do that a lot. But training is a big issue. I think it shows respect for people. It shows that you think they're smart enough to understand. It shows that you think they're going to be around because you're investing the time in them. And I think people take a certain amount of pride in having been given some additional training. So I think that this needs to continue on. I don't think we can over-communicate to employees. I think employees need to always know anything that's coming up that's going to affect them in any way, unless it's of utmost confidentiality, such as an acquisition or selling or something of that nature. These employees need to know about that before it happens. And they need to be able to see some equipment coming in the door and they were told 2 weeks ago that we were going to buy that equipment. Or they need to know that something's going to be happening and we're going to change product lines, we're going to go to a different way of selling products, or we're going to do something different. And the employees need to know ahead of time. They don't need to be surprised. That way they are kind of on the inside on that, and that gives them the respect that they think they should have as well. So I don't think we can over-communicate. I think we'll get to this in just a minute. Just a second, we'll get to another part of that. When we had the brick companies, we put these 3 companies together. We started off with 2,200 employees, got down to 1,700. We improved, we built 25% more brick with 1,700 people versus 2,200 people. I mean, all those things were just clicking. The synergies of that, a lot of times most consolidations and acquisitions never yield what you thought they were going to. And yet we had all this chaos with this confusion going on. But I think ours truly was 2 + 2 = 5, And so the first 3 years of the business, I had small group meetings with all 1,700 employees. And I went around all throughout our whole company there. And we do this all day sometimes. And that's when I really had to say, did I talk about this? Because I've had this speech like 8 times already today, and it's midnight. But we would have speeches, sessions with employees, and I'd talk 30 minutes about, I'd tell them how much money we're making, our profits, our market share, return on assets. And we went through that whole return on asset thing. And we're teaching the fourth grade education people, and it didn't take them long to figure this out, about return on investments and why it has to be this much. And they understood that just in a second. So we went through that, and I would usually stop and say, okay, it's your time to talk. And I would take Leonard Gibbs, the HR guy, with me. He had more credibility than anybody in the world. And I'd say, it's your time to talk. What I want you to do is anything that you bring up, we will probably do, unless it's illegal, unless it causes us to lose money, or unless it's some big major directional change in going to market. But almost anything you suggest, we will start doing. And this is a group of people in another plant in Alabama, and the union president happened to be in this, and his name was CEOCafe. It's funny how you remember those names. And anyway, we had this meeting, and I said, okay, it's your turn to talk. I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to write on the board, but Leonard's going to write on this piece of paper that we're going to have typed in a few minutes and give everybody a copy of it. And we will come back a year from now, and we will grade our papers on how we did on this. And we're going to say, you had 9 suggestions, here's what we did, and here's what we didn't do. So it was so encouraging, and that was one of those things that should have been videotaped, because it was one of those cold chill meetings for me, because, okay, somebody talk, and CEOCafe, the union president, raises his hand, and he says, first thing we got to do is make a profit in this company. We can't work for a loser because it won't be around. Woo, what a great way to start, you know. This thing's going the right direction, you know, and so we go from there to talking about quality of products, and if we got this piece of equipment, we could make this kind of brick, and not only probably a little faster, but those edges we have trouble with, it would trim those edges better, and just lots of good information like that. And this went on for 2 hours, and Leonard's just riding up a storm, you know. So we did all of those things, but at the end I said, I don't think I've heard everybody. I said, I think there's a subject that we haven't touched that's maybe the most important one of all, and it has to do with respect. I said, I want you to respect me, and I want to respect you. And I said, that's critically important, and respect each other, our values and who we are and our work ethic and all of that. And so anything to say on that? And it was real quiet for a minute. And Sheep's hand went up in the back of the room, and he said, well, we've got a plant manager that throws tools around, swears, yells at us, and calls us names, and uses the N-word from time to time, and whatever. And we talked about that a minute ago. And I said, that I promise you that will cease to exist real soon. So I visited with that person after a series of those meetings, and I said, here's what came up. And he said, well, that's kind of just me. He said, I have really good low cost, and I have good productivity, and our safety is good, and about the best in the company, and that's kind of who I am. I was raised rough, and that's who I am. And so I said, well, we're going to try to unmake you, remake you, because that's not who we're going to be here. So we sent him off to off-site training for a few weeks and brought him back in and had him spend time with plant managers that really do well, that manage people well. And he came back, and finally he just said, that's who I am. I ain't changing. And I said, well, this sounds a little harsh, but it gives me great pleasure to tell you that you were an employee of our company, but you don't work here anymore. And when these employees fill out these little forms and you go through this thing, you get to the respect, and they talk about this, and you're not firing somebody so you can tell them that you did this, but you're addressing something, you're giving a person a fair chance to respond and show that his heart's in it, you know. And I think all of us, if we know somebody's heart's with us, we can go a long way. But when we know there's a belligerent, obstinate, I ain't going to change kind of attitude, then that's when we say there needs to be something done differently here, there. So respect is the key issue there. Encourage change, you know, don't fear change. Tiger Woods, he had won more, I think this is true, won more major championships at this early age than anybody ever had. And then he announced he was firing his swing coach, and he was changing his swing all around from top to bottom. And you say, wow, why would he do that? He's the best. And I'm a Jack Nicklaus guy, but he's better than Jack Nicklaus was. So why would he do that? Well, he knew inherently he could be better, you know. And so he said, I'm going to change my golf swing. I'm going to rework that thing, and I'm going to bite the bullet and pay the price for a while. And then I'm going to be a better golfer, which he has proven to be. And so he's taken that on and obviously gone and made that happen. In our brick company, we were making tons of money when we'd given those people that $600. But when we'd done that, we were making lots of money after that and doing better than we ever expected those 3 companies would do. But it was kind of that same thing as if it ain't broke, break it, you know. Well, we weren't broken at all, but I just felt like we really could rise to, and we called it the next level project. And so we looked at everything from digging dirt to getting the receivables, every single transaction or every action from there to there. Shipping, making products, every plant, every product we made, the margins we made on it. It took 6 months. We had all of our vice presidents leave their regular job and go to Augusta, Georgia, and stay in a hotel there for 6 months. And the people below them ran their departments for 6 months, because we knew if the top people weren't sold on making these big changes of going direct here, selling ourselves instead of through their old buddies, the distributors, then if somebody came back and told them, they'd give us all kinds of resistance. So we needed them to understand the math and the logic behind the big changes we were making. So we were remaking our company, and it turned out really well. And we were in the midst of adding another $20-something million of earnings to the bottom line without letting one person go. And it was just re-looking at our whole business there. And this is a little bit the same thing, but it's keep on asking yourself what it is, what do we do for a living, you know? I mean, what products do we make and what should we be making? and what services do we render, what assets do we have employed, and looking at every group of assets and trying to determine, are they paying their way, are they returning their cost of capital, and if they're not returning their cost of capital, are they then a part of something else that more than returns their cost of capital? It's amazing how many assets we just lopped off. We just said, you know, they don't fit. You know, we went through our brick offerings when we put the three companies together. There were a lot of overlapping markets. We had 800 something different brick, and we started having 5 o'clock in the morning meetings because everybody's day was full. And I felt like this was so important. We met for a week from 5 till 8:30 every morning. And everybody came in almost in their jammies. You know, they were so tired. They complained, they whined and everything. But we went from 800 and something brick down to 300 and something brick. And we said if it didn't have the volume, didn't have the profitability, or if it had quality problems, then we weren't going to make it anymore. And that worked really, really well. We had a few customers complain. We were able to shift them over to something else. And so I think it's just a continual review of who are we, what do we do for a living, and why do we do this? And this is some of the same thing, eliminate those non-performing assets. And then this other thing is maybe a little different than maybe you've thought about or maybe not, but I think we want the customer to recognize us as the best. And we want to be noticed and recognizable as the best. But I don't think we necessarily get paid for being perfect. And a casual example of that, back to the brick business, a cube of brick, and you've seen out in front of houses, hopefully most of those with the gold and green tag that says Boral on them. But I think they've got 400 or 500 brick depending on the size in there, and it wasn't uncommon for there to be 8 to 10 cracked brick in there that they couldn't use, and they just threw those away. Well, I said a good example for us is let's don't try to have 0 cracked brick, because that would require us to repackage it different, to ship it different, and we wouldn't get paid for that. They'd say, well, if we expect that from you, let's have them have 2 or 3 cracked brick, and let's get it down to that level, and they'll notice that, you know. And they'll notice that we have fewer mistakes on our invoices. And they'll notice that we're just a little nicer on the telephone when we answer the phone. And they'll notice that we're better, easier people to deal with. But our distributors will notice that we give them more tools and more training with which to sell our products. And so that says that we want to be the best, but we don't want to be perfect. We want our customers to notice that we're a little better on everything than the other guy. This has to do with the hard type IT information, and it has to do with maybe just the soft type of information too. And of course, you know that to make critical decisions on which products you keep and which you don't, and plants you keep open, and customers you consider buying, and advances, you've got to have a lot of hard technical data that tell you exactly what your costs are, and the ingredients in the costs, and all the pieces of that cost factor. But there's another piece of this too, and it goes back to that experience factor. And we had a plant maybe over in Augusta, Georgia, that was having real high costs, and I asked our VP about that. What's the problem with Plant 3 in Augusta? Well, he said, we're looking into that. I noticed that myself, and he said, we're running some new reports, and it's going to take about 2 weeks to get those reports back. And 2 weeks? We got to wait 2 weeks to find out what the answer to the problem is? Yeah, we'll get it then. And I said, well, why don't you do a favor? I'll bet you if you go over to Augusta Plant 3, and they're hot plants, brick plants are hot plants, and if you set a folding chair down in the middle of the plant, and if you ask every third person that passes by, what's the problem here? You'll probably find the answer out. And he did that, and he came back, and the answer was the setting machine was doing something out of kilter, and it was causing us to have lots of dropped brick and going back and rerunning those things. And so there's lots of sources of information, and not all those are on our computer, but we need to utilize all of those. And then measuring the competition. I always wanted to know how we're doing. I mean, that's the competitive part that says we just want to do better. And when we know we've had the greatest return on sales and return on assets, and we're the largest, we kind of would say in our meeting, hey guys, we won the state championship this year. We're in 6A and we won the state championship. But let's prove that we're not one-year wonders, or we're not flukes, and let's do it a second time. So what do we have to do it a second time? And this goes back a little bit to taking on those hard decisions, that 10% of the people that relish jumping in and getting into the mess, and it's the mess that you try to leave or let somebody else do or try to pretend isn't there. And I think the quicker you get into those and solve them, that doesn't anywhere near always mean terminating somebody. It means sitting down, finding out why something isn't being accomplished and trying to figure out a way to do it. And but I think you just got to want to jump in and take on those. And you got to get out of your office. I don't know what you all do for a living. There's a lot of diversity here, but I didn't learn very much in my office, and learned a ton of stuff out with customers and suppliers and employees. and you just have to get out and talk to people. Nothing like going to a customer and not taking the sales guy along because he's going to protect his sales guy, but going to a customer by yourself and asking him really, how are we doing for you? And he'll tell you the truth, and then go back and immediately take care of that. And that's the way to get that done, I think, a lot of times. And so all of that kind of led to the fact that, you know, we had 1,700 employees, and these 1,700 folks were going to be doing millions of things every year. I mean, millions of things every year. And these millions of things would all in themselves be worthy little projects, you know, this little project here and that there and whatever. But if we didn't do a few things really, really, really well, then those millions of things almost don't matter. You know, our success is going to be driven by how we do those few things that really make a difference. And all of those meetings we have with employees, I was asking, what is it we do well? What don't we do well? What should we be doing? You know, you're listening, you're taking notes. And then our little inner circle there, we were really clear on some things we thought should be done, but we were testing that out with all the employees. What if we said these were the things we need to be working on? Is that close? Are we on the right track? And first time we did that, you know, it was a little cumbersome getting through that. But we thought whenever we decide on what those things are, we can't just tell the world, okay, we're going to emphasize these 6 or fewer things and then say that's it, everybody knows it and they're going to go to work. We had to have some checks and balances in place to say, okay, we've agreed as a company, not just a few of us, but as a whole company, 1,700 of us have agreed that these things are important to do. And we've got to have a way to make sure we get those done. And so we want to force feed responsibilities all the way through the whole business to make sure that a small piece of that, one of those 6 objectives, one person felt a lot of responsibility to do a small piece of one of those, or actually all 6 of those, to make those happen, because he knew there were 1,700 other people that were doing those small pieces, and you're going to add all those up together and you're going to get your answer of your goal or above. And so we started doing 3x5 cards, and I've been a believer in these for long before I did that. And the reason we laminated those is every year before the year started, we'd laminate them because if we didn't, we'd erase them and change them if we weren't making our goal. So we had these, and all of our managers carried those every day in their left shirt pocket. And some guys didn't wear pockets at first. They had shirts that had pockets, but everybody started wearing those. And it's amazing. I've always thought that there's almost like a law of gravity, as I said earlier, that when you write it down, first of all, if you can't write down your objective, then you're probably not going to do it if you can't articulate it enough to put it in words. And then if you write it down, I think you're already halfway there because you've written it down, and there's almost a subconscious thing that keeps rolling around in your head that keeps forcing you to try to work toward that. And so those years we were there, we came up with a 3x5 card, and here was one year of 2004 on the 3x5 card. And we had 5 objectives, but I'll concentrate on one of those, and that was produce and sell 1.6 billion brick. And that is enough brick to circle the globe 8 times if you laid them end to end. So that's a lot of brick. And so you say, okay, you got enough brick to go around the earth 6 times, and who wants to sell Argentina brick, you know, or who wants to, I mean, it's a lot of brick to get rid of. So we've got our VP of sales. His goal is to sell 1.6 billion brick. He also has goals up here on safety. He has goals on manufacturing costs. He has goals on customer service, new product sales, and average selling price. And so every manager in our company had all these 6 goals that were their goals. I'm just giving this as one example. So Dan had the 1.6 billion brick to sell. He had 4 regional managers, and I just roughly did this yesterday. I'm not even sure if the numbers add up. But he had a guy named Richard Langley that was one of his regional guys, and he had a goal of, say, 350 million brick. And so Richard had a bunch of district people reporting to him. And so here was Johnette Jeffcoat, and she's a great sales lady, great sales manager for us in Columbia, South Carolina. And Johnette Jeffcoat had 80 million brick a year she was going to sell. And Johnette knew that she had to sell 80 million brick this year. And she had working for her 5 people, we'll say, and Ken was going to sell 8 million brick himself in 4 quarters. So obviously some other people have to sell some greater amounts. Ken might have been the new guy. Ken might have had a new part of their territory, whatever. But they've decided they can do 80, and this group has decided, yes, you can sign me up for enough to make equal 80 million brick, and Johnette will deliver for you. And Johnette says to Richard, you can count on me. Me and my guys are going to do it. Richard says to Dan, he says, hey, we're going to do our part, and the other people do as well. And so the way that really worked is we had a quarterly plan, and so they had agreed with their manager. They'd kind of had full agreement on this, and so we had a page that had a page for each of the 6 objectives. And Ken is down here is going to say, my goal is to sell 8 million brick. And I'm going to sell 1 million in the first quarter because it's raining and bad. Then I'm doing some preliminary work for the second and third quarters when building takes up. And I'm going to sell 1 million brick. And this is what I'm going to do that quarter to sell the 1 million brick in that quarter, as well as lay the groundwork for future quarters of that year. I'm going to meet with 6 architects this quarter. I'm going to put brick on 5 parade of home houses around the whole South Carolina area. I'm going to do this, this, and this, and here's what I'm going to do. And so at the end of the first quarter, Ken would send to me kind of how he had done on that. And I would look at that, and Ken may have sold his 1 million brick and had done 6 of those 7 things he was going to do that quarter to make the 1 million plus the next. And I would write Ken back within a week. I'd write all 105 people a personal letter back that said, great job on your 1 million. That's really good. You're on your way to getting your 8. And I can't tell you how important your 1 million is to 1.6 billion. And that doesn't sound much, but you're doing what you said you would do. And we're counting on you to do all you said you would do. And I'm really pleased that you're able to do something about these 6, and I might mention some of those that have proven difficult for other people, and thank you for that and whatever. And the 7th one you've had difficulty with, Joe over here, Joe and Sue in another territory both do that really, really well. And they've learned how to do that one. So I'm going to call both of them and have them call you next week and talk that through with you. And I want you to send me back just a brief note on what you might be doing differently to take care of that 7th one. And so we were really trying to force feed this all the way down and let everybody buy into making this thing work. And their personal objectives were all tied into that. And I'd have to say for a bunch of years running, that worked really well. We paid them well when they met their objectives, and when they surpassed their objectives, we even paid them weller. So we really tried to honor that whole process that says, give them positive surprises, not just a thank you, but maybe some financial things as well. This little 3x5 card, I was using those personally before I did this. I've used these kind of for 20 years myself. And so anyway, a man named Nick Margaritondo was one of our sales guys in Atlanta, but that's not a Southern name. He was from Philadelphia. And so Nick's father had died just a month or 2 before that, and Nick was in our office, and I could hear his Philadelphia accent real loud, and that whole thing, and good sales guy for us. And so as he came by my office, I said, hey, Nick, you got a second? And he came in. I said, I understand your father passed away, and I'm really sorry to hear about that. And I said, if you have a minute, I'd like to hear about your dad. And so he told me about his dad. And I don't want to get too emotional about this. My father passed away a couple of years ago myself. But I said, tell me about your dad. And he said, well, he went on about what a good guy he was and how great he was with his kids and whatever. And then Nick said, after about an hour of that, he said, what are you doing this weekend? And I said, well, actually, I'm going to my parents' house this weekend, and I have a call with Australia and on Friday night, so I'm going to go up Friday about noon so I can get there, and then I'll take the call probably in my mother and dad's bedroom. And I'll probably eat ice cream most of the call, and maybe even read the newspaper while they can't see that. But he said, well, when you go up there and see your folks, he said, tell your dad you love him because he won't be around forever. And I said, well, my dad and I don't say that. We love each other, but we don't say that, It's just kind of an unspoken thing. We know it, but we don't say it. He said, well, hug your dad anyway. And I said, we don't even do that. I said, we shake hands, but we know it's a firm shake. We know we love each other, And we almost move close to each other when we shake hands. So it's, and we slug each other in the arms. So that's the way boys tell each other they love each other. And he said, that doesn't work, but do what you got to do. Well, my assistant, on the call I was making to Australia, my assistant had written on there this long phone number to call to get the operator in Australia, and then what we were going to talk about on the call. And she had heard us, that was all typed in, and she had heard us talking about that, and she knew that I always said, if it's on the card, I'm going to do it. So she wrote on the bottom of the card, in parentheses, real small print, hug your dad this weekend, because she had heard us talking outside the door. And so I was sitting in my mother's and dad's bedroom, and I'm eating ice cream and reading the paper, and I'm looking at this thing. I kept reading that thing. I kept saying, now, you do everything that's on the card, and I was trying to break one of those rules of, don't do the hard things. Just you do that next time. Just forget that card. But I went out of the call after about 5 hours, and a couple of sisters had come, and their husbands were there, and there was a room full of people, cousins and nieces, and my mom and dad, and my wife, and one or two of my children. And they said, "How'd your call go?" And I said, "Oh, it went fine." And I said, "This little card here, I've told you all about these things." And I said, "I do everything on the card." And the bottom of this card says, "Hug your dad tonight." So I'm going to hug you. And it was real quiet, you know. And I wish that everybody made a lot of noise, but they didn't. And so I said, "I'm going to hug you." My dad said, he said, "I wanted to hug you for 25 years. And I said, "Why didn't you ever do that?" And he said, "I was afraid to. I was afraid what you would do." And I said, "I was waiting for you to do it." And so then we did that, you know, and somebody took a picture of that. And then we did that, and then he said, "I shouldn't be this way." But then he said, I told him, I said, "I can't do these 2 trips in a row, but I'm going to write down there next time, tell your dad you love him. I can't hug you and tell you I love you the same day. That's an overdose of emotion to you." You know, we love each other, but that's too much for us. And he said, "I wanted to tell you I love you for 53 years. And I said, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" And he said, "Because nobody ever told me." And so we started that process then too. And I've told that story a lot of times to a lot of different people. And this had nothing to do with what we were talking about. You know, I was at a big group at a big hotel, and I visited the hotel a lot, and they wanted me to talk about their customer service because I thought it was superlative, you know. And so I talked about what business travelers are looking for when they go to a hotel, all the list of things we want and what we don't want. And then I said, "This has nothing to do with customer service. Let me tell you a 3x5 card story." I told him that story. And about 2 months later, a maintenance man was coming up to fix a light or something in my room. And he said, "You're the 3x5 card guy, aren't you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You were here a couple months ago." And I said, "Yeah, I was." He said, "I was listening in outside the door." And he said, "I took that card and I went home and hugged my brother, who I hadn't talked to in months and months." And he said, "I told my brother I loved him too." And I've told that story to a bunch of people, and I'm sorry to get emotional over that. But I've told that story to a bunch of raw bone masonry contractors. And I remember one time at Bones Restaurant down in Atlanta, a nice restaurant, we had a bunch of guys in, there were 6 of them at my table. And out of the 6, I told that story. I pulled my card out, one of them said, "What is that?" And I had some stuff to do that day, and I said, "Let me tell you a little story." So they all listened to that. And 4 of the 6, on their own, committed that day, before the week's over, we're going to hug somebody we need to tell, and we're going to love somebody we need to tell that to. So I would challenge you all to do the same thing. That's all I can say.